All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me for this lesson delivery. I appreciate you guys making some time for this. We're going to get started, but before we do that, I want to tell you guys what we are doing today, right? So this is a lesson from week 3 of our exploration for the school year 2024 in modern world history, right? And the broader question that we're trying to answer, right, is what happens when cultures meet, and then we're narrowing that question down to a bit more of a precise question, which is how did European colonization change societies in the Americas and Africa? Right? And then there's an even more precise question within that we're going to be exploring today. We're going to be exploring how European settlers in North America and the Native American people in those regions who already lived there viewed each other and their interactions, so how they perceived each other. And we're going to do that by doing some document analysis. So that's going to be the main ask of our day today. But before we do a sort of how these people view each other, I want us to get a sense of who some of these people might be. So I want you to click, if you can see in the chat, the first document, right? And that's going to be a short reading that's going to tell you a little bit about some of these North American people. So take 4 to 5 minutes and we'll do a reading, right? And then we'll come back and ask some questions about it. Okay, so I think that is our allotted time for the reading. If I could ask you, someone unmute yourself and tell me one thing that you noticed while you were doing the reading. How were these, right? The question I want to see if we can address, how are these people in North America organized? What I'm hinting at in the difference between the way that the people in those empires may have been organized as opposed to some of these people in North America.
I think, I guess, similar in some ways to the
Mm-hmm.
Anasazi, the Mayans
Mm-hmm.
were, I believe they did reside in one central place, whereas I
Mm-hmm.
think like the Incas and the Aztecs, they had more movement, from my recollection.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think there was some different in like the cultural practices and sort of like
Mm-hmm.
organizations of that, these were, whereas those were very centralized. I
Mm-hmm.
guess this perhaps was not as much.
Okay, so I think those the people in the South and Mesoamerican empires, right? One thing that is really important to note about them is that they were highly centralized, right? They were based on different city states, right? But in their cities, right, they could have up to 200,000 people. Whereas if I could ask, was there anything of that scale in any of the North American societies in our reading?
No, I think the most it mentioned was like pueblos with like 1,000 people roughly,
Mm-hmm.
probably.
Mm-hmm. Right. So you guys are really noticing some of the similarities, and that's good, right? I think it helps to keep a focus on that these, despite how they're organized, these are still people, and they tend towards certain sets of behavior that they have in common, whether they're in Europe, in South America, or North America. But I think for me, I want to highlight those differences to show that those urbanized empires, right, with their big capitals of 200,000 people or even more, and then their empires where they ruled over up to millions of people, right, are a little bit different than the North American tribes or social organization, however they were, whether they were in smaller groups of 1,000, right, or even smaller groups of bands of 50 or 60 individuals, right? I think those are two things that we want to keep in mind when we start exploring some of these interactions between the people of North America and the European settlers, right? So we're talking about the Native Americans and how they thought of the settlers, and the settlers and how they thought of Native Americans. Before we get to the main part of the lesson, I want to do one more thing, right? I want to see if we can do a knowledge check. And Shakil, if I could ask you, right? Do you know what year Christopher Columbus sailed from Spain to the New World, right? What year did he sail from Spain, right, to Hispaniola? If you don't know it, I am happy to accept your best guess.
I think Christopher Columbus sailed in
Mm-hmm.
in in 1492.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, no, that's really good. That's exactly the year, right? And we've been talking about the Inca, the Aztec, and the Maya, right? Who were prior to that period, right? The Maya Empire was not even around when the European explorers show up to South America, to Central America, right? But the Aztecs are, but they're in the 15th century, right? So they're in the late 1400s, and then they're also in the 16th century, so in the 1500s. But today we want to be engaging with a reading that's not from that time period. It's actually from a few centuries forward. We're going to be talking about European and Native American interactions in the 1700s, right? So that brings us much further forward in time. And if you guys want to have a look at the chat one more time, so I have a few things posted there, right? So I want to see if we can keep track of them, right? So the first link we opened was the one that gave us our access to our reading, right? The guided reading. If you open the second link, right, you'll find a helper, right? This is gonna guide you to understand which document is coming from which perspective, right? And the third one is what we're actually engaging with today. So if you open the third, right, at the top, you'll see it says, we are different nations and have different ways.
We are different nations and have different ways. European Americans and Native Americans view each other, 1700 to 1775. In British America, there was no greater sense of otherness than between Europeans and Native Americans. Both Indians and Africans represented the other to the white colonists, but the Indians have one card denied to the enslaved Africans autonomy. As sovereign entities, the Indian nations and the European colonies and countries often dealt as peers in trade, war, land deals, and treaty negotiations. Indians held power and used it. As late as 1755, an English trader asserted that the prosperity of our colonies in the continent will stand or fall with the interest and favor among them. Here we canvass the many descriptions of Indians by white colonists and Europeans, and sample the sparse but telling record of the Native American perspective on Europeans and their culture in pre-revolutionary 18th century British America. All come to us, of course, through the white man's perspective, ear, and pen. Were it not for the white missionaries, explorers, and frontier negotiators, the go-betweens known as woodsmen, we would have a much sparser record of the Indian response to colonists and their civilizing campaigns.
All right, thank you, Ferdusi. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to read one of these perspectives, right? So if you guys are on the helper document, I'm going to read the, let me see, second document. I apologize, right? So I'm gonna read the second document, right? So if you're on the page, on the front page, you want to go to the second page, right? And I'm going to start reading from, "It is certain that good talents are found among them." And this is a quote, right, from a larger snippet by Francis Louise Michel. Fantastic. So I'm going to start reading, follow along, if you will. "It is certain that good talents are found among them," by Francis Louise Michel in Virginia in 1702. And we have a little description of who Michel is. He's a visiting Swiss nobleman, right? So he's from Switzerland and he's a nobleman, right? So he's from the ruling class in Switzerland, right? He attended the colony's memorial after the death of King William, an event that the neighboring subdued Indians were expected to attend, right? If I could have someone tell me what they think subdued Indian in this context means.
I think it could refer to um the groups of Native Americans that the U.S. sorry, not U.S. that the European settlers basically won against in battles.
Absolutely, that's a perfect definition, Maru. So this is from the perspective of Francis Louis Michel. He says, after the celebration was over, I endeavored to sell as best as I could whatever remained of my merchandise. I intended to exchange with the Indians skins, baskets for skins and I'm sorry, I'm going to go back and read. I intended to exchange with the Indians skins and baskets for powders and knives. A Frenchman and I were astonished at the baskets and that the two of them could speak English. One of them looked at us and said in poor English whether we thought that if he had been taught like we, they could not learn a thing just as well as we. I asked him where he had learned to speak English. He answered, they were not so stupid because they had to come every year and they could hear us speak and learnt it that way. It is certain that good talent is found among them. Okay, so I want us to go to the last document that I attached in the chat, right? And I think you'll see there some question and answer boxes, right? I want you to go there and see the first question that I asked, right? Who is this author, right? And to that, you could simply answer the author is Francis Louis Michel, but I want you to give me a little bit more, right? I want you to read the little blurb underneath and tell me that he's a visiting nobleman, right? So I want you to tell me that he is probably from the upper class, he's from Switzerland, right? But he most definitely is European, and I want you to note that. The second thing that I want, right, to be looking at this is what is the author's values? And I want someone to help me here, right? Someone, please unmute yourself and let me know what you think this author's values are. What is important to this person?
I'm guessing since we have the knowledge that he's a merchant and he
Mm-hmm.
wants to sell his
Mm-hmm.
goods, that's probably his priority. So, like, his business.
Certainly, he's at a funeral, right? And he's trying to make some money. It is without a doubt one of his values, one of his priorities. What else does he think is important to have, right? Other than money. Shakil Maruf, do you wanna give it a try? You're more than
Wait, sorry.
welcome to. Yeah,
Can you repeat it one more time?
of course, of course. So we've established that one of his values is making money, right? He's at a funeral, and it's really important for him, even though he's at a funeral, he wants to make sure he makes some money while he's here, right? So we're wondering what else he might find important in this situation. I think that speaks to me that he values talent, right? And that also sort of gets us at our last question. The question that I want to ask is how does the author view the others? How does the author view the others? Now, Shakil, tell me, who is the others in this instance for the author?
Um, I would guess the others in this would
Mm-hmm.
probably be like the natives, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so since he's a Swiss, right, he's from Europe, the others in this situation is Native Americans. And based on what we read, can you tell me just in, as detailed as you like or as few words as you like, can you tell me what he thinks of the Native Americans?
Um, I would say he thinks of them as like um
Mm-hmm.
I feel like he would think of them as like he thinks more or less of them than they actually are, maybe.
Okay. Okay.
Or he just
So yeah, continue.
no, that was it. That was it.
That was it. Okay, all right. So I think you're very astute, right? You're very clever in noticing that he thinks, right, that there's less to them, all right? Because in the way that he says it, it is certain that good talents are found among them. So that tells me that he doesn't think of them as very talented people, right, who are all around talented. He just thinks, oh, some of them, right, might have some talent. But at a general level, I think his feeling is that, oh, these people are not really that talented, right? So that's one person's perspective. What I want us to do, right, I want us to go through this document, right? And you can certainly take advantage of the helper to identify which perspective is European, which perspective is North American. right? I want us to read at least one more European perspective, and I want us to read a handful, right? A few uh, Native American perspective, right? So one more European perspective and a few Native American perspectives, all right? And do the same thing that I just did. I want us to go through who is the author, right? Say a little bit about them. What is the author's values? What is important for the author? How does the author view the authors, right? Does he think the others are talented? Does he think the others are kind or good? Right? Obviously, to do that, you have to be able to identify who the others are, as you did, Shakil. Right? So that's what I want us to spend some time in class, right? And then we'll reconvene to talk about how we understood this document and these questions. Okay? So start going through, right? I want us to do this in pairs, right? So I'll pair Maruf and Shakil, and since we're odd numbered, Ferdusi, I will work with you.